from the University of Toledo and his PhD at OU. He is currently an assistant teaching professor in OU's English department. Jason's PhD dissertation explored how medieval authors and scholars understood the concept of gender. The 14th century author Geoffrey Chaucer is particularly known for playing with gender characteristics in some of his literary characters. Today, Jason will explore these gender constructions and which might have influenced medieval authors in their character development. In his lecture, Whose Gender Is It? Constructing Characteristics and Personalities in Medieval Literature. Jason.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I hope we're doing well. And thank you to Dr. Coleman and the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies for asking me to speak. Thank you to Anne-Marie Eckhart and Medieval Fair Lecture Series. I know many of us are looking forward to the Medieval Fair next weekend. This is going to be kind of dicey, so I'm going to do it the best I can with juggling the PowerPoint and my paper presentation. Hi, come on in. So I hope this to be an enlightening and fun presentation on how medieval society understood the ways gender and gender characteristics were composed in an individual, and how medieval authors like Geoffrey Chaucer represented those in his characters, primarily in the Canterbury Tale Pilgrims. My literary examples will deal with Chaucer primarily, and primarily the Canterbury Tale Pilgrims. Up on the screen here, the end images are two of Chaucer's pilgrims. So on the left-hand side, you see, your left-hand side, you see the miller, Chaucer's miller. And on the right-hand side, you see the wife of Bath, both of which I will discuss later in terms of their characteristics. These images are from the 15th century illuminated Ellesmere manuscript, which has some depictions of these pilgrims, and I'll show some of them just to give a little bit of illustration as to what Chaucer was playing with. There's not a lot of illumination images, but we do have the Ellesmere manuscript. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, the Canterbury Tales, series of tales told by various participants traveling to Canterbury Cathedral in the shrine of Thomas Becket, 12th century Archbishop of Canterbury, who disagreed with King Henry II and was murdered by Henry's followers. The pilgrims are described in various characteristics and social classes, giving the audience a variety of different people. The middle image here is from the National Library of Medicine's page on Shakespeare and the humor, showing that the idea of humor has had an influence on how writers developed characters well into the Renaissance. Both Shakespeare and Chaucer used these theories to construct literary characters who were rich and complex, and who also reflected how medieval society thought about gender. And this, the Four Humors, just comes from a nifty website that my students like to see. And you can see that it has some manuscript images here of the humoral theories, some of the melancholy, sanguine, phlegmatic. We've got an interesting one here of the humors being associated with parts of the body. And so you see the humors being associated directly with specific organs and specific parts of the body. And this is just some of the things that were in those kinds of medical miscellanies. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But this site is a nifty site, especially for students. Yeah.
It's only sharing your PowerPoint screen, not what you're scrolling.
Okay. All right. Well, then I don't know how to share that. I don't know how to go back and forth. Will it share it up here? Yeah, it shares it up here, but it won't. Sorry for. Oh, okay. I can go back and forth. Okay. All right. This might get even dicier. Okay. So, all right. Let's see how I can micromanage this. All right. Yeah. Okay, so now you can see some of the images from the National Library of Medicine website. Just to show you, again, here is the image I was talking about with the different humors pointing to different organs in the body. So that's what I was trying to show. Okay, all right, now I'm switching back to the PowerPoint, okay? Let's see if I can find it. There we go. All right, now let's see if it works. There we go. Okay, all right. So part of this lecture is a general discussion about the sources and theories for medieval beliefs on how gender and characteristics were composed, which includes biological, humors, physiognomy, and astrology. The other part will be some examples and illustrations from various manuscripts, like I just showed, and some literary examples from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, all to help illustrate some of these concepts. I do have one disclaimer, okay? This isn't a discussion about current gender politics or how we believe gender and characteristics to be inherent or constructed. This is a focus on what medieval society thought about gender, physically and through characteristics. Okay. Just so we're on the same page. Okay, but let us begin with the sources that medieval authors like Chaucer would have been familiar with. In the 11th and 12th centuries, Arabic versions of ancient medical treatises based on theories by Hippocrates, Galen, and others were translated into Latin. Translations by medical students and teachers, such as Constantinus Africanus, Constantine the African, were associated with the medical school of Salerno, Italy. Just to note, Constantinus Africanus was a physician in the 11th century who worked in Africa before coming to Salerno. We know he died before 1100 through his association with the medical school in Salerno. And this is actually a depiction of him inspecting a patient's urine sample. Very interesting, you know. It's from a 14th century manuscript, which looks like it might have been collected from earlier manuscripts or copied. It was bequeathed to the Bodleian in 1775. Let me just show you a better image of it if I can. I might get good at this. Okay, maybe not. Maybe not, maybe not. All right, here we go. All right, there we go. Okay, I hope you can see this at home. Your screen sharing is being paused, of course. No, it's not. Yes, okay. All right, I'm sorry. I don't know how to show this one at home. Please bear with me. But this is from the Bodleian website, and it shows a manuscript with some of these medical miscellanies in them, okay? And here we've got, like I said before, Constantine the African looking at a urine sample and inspecting it. We've got other images here, you know, I'm not sure what this is doing, maybe fire with the humans, the elements or something to do with that. We have a lot of, you know, what is this one again? Yeah, cauterization, right? We have a lot of them that are being cauterized. So this is just to include, you know, what some of these medical miscellanies actually had in them. If that's an interesting one, we'll move on. Yes. Yes, there are going to be some of those in here too. I like the one with the back. Yeah, obviously some back problems going on here. Okay. But you know, interesting things. So yes, for you at home, let me get back to my normal share with the PowerPoint. All right. There we go. Okay. So going on to, Salerno. All right, let me just show you a little bit of where Salerno was. So here's a not so good map of where Salerno was located. And you can see it's pretty central to, you know, where the Mediterranean is. You can see the African coast, the North African coast there. Travel through the Strait of Messina here, made it very easy. So it was a centrally located place that could garner a lot of information. Here's a not so better, this is an even worse one. Yeah, my technological skills aren't all that great. But as you can see, it was centrally located to North Africa and accessible through the Mediterranean. Let me discuss what they would do at this medical school. Teaching and practicing would be part of what went on at Salerno, but they would also write and compile medical treatises aided by theories on anatomy and sex organs, as well as medieval theories on gender characteristics that were translated into Middle English from Latin and Arabic texts. These Arabic texts, which preserve the Greek classical tradition of medicine, were translated into Latin by medieval authors and became the sources for medieval medical texts. So it is likely that medieval authors like Chaucer would have had access to Latin translations of these medical texts. We know that Chaucer had connections at court. He was a member of the royal court of Edward III and Richard II. His roles included being an esquire for the court, comptroller of the customs of the Port of London, and other official duties over the years of his service. So texts by, Constantinus Africanus could have easily passed through Chaucer's hands with his connection and presence at court. And we know that Latin translations of Arabic texts found their way to England as early as the 12th century. So these Arabic texts had their own glosses and commentaries from Arabic language authors, some of whom became authorities in their own right. Rhazes, for example, not only translated, but also practiced Greek medical theory, including humoral theory. When we say practiced, diagnosed with humoral theory and then, gave remedy to. Oh yeah, falling all over the place here. Okay. All right. Now we come to the Compendium of Medicine, which details Latin medical practices, again, which were based off of Arabic texts. This was written and compiled prior to 1250 by Gilbertus Anglicus, who was England's first noted writer of medical treatises. Chaucer did know of Gilbertus Anglicus. Chaucer included him among the famous medical minds listed by his Doctor of Physic, which might indicate that there was a growing interest in medicine outside the university if it was included in a piece of literature. Something to consider is if and how this might also reflect how Chaucer may have come into contact with some of these medical texts and theories. And this is from the general prologue of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. The image is just a stock, and we don't have an image from the Ellesmere of the Doctor of Physic, but so this is just an image from a manuscript of a doctor administering to a patient. Chaucer mentions a variety of sources that the physician is familiar with, including Galen, Constantine the African, Gilbertus Anglicus. He mentions Hippocrates in there. So he's got a whole list of the Doctor of Physics knowledge going there. So we know that Chaucer had that connection. He knew of them. And Chaucer could have come into contact with a variety of texts by any of these authors through his courtly work. But whether he actually did or not has yet to be discovered. But at least we know he knew of these theories. Okay. Side note, there is a possibility, although I don't know about it for sure, that Chaucer's physician might have been based on a real physician named Ardairn, but there really isn't any significant evidence for that. But the important thing remains that it is possible that Chaucer had contact with these texts and were aware of their theories and practices. Now, the question is, did the medical knowledge or even basic understanding travel outside the court and into a general population? And here we can begin to see Chaucer as a type of middleman who could have relayed some of these scientific theories through his writing, thereby bringing them into a wider audience. Even if a medieval person was not privy to the terminology and the exact science of beliefs on gender characteristics, they would have known the basics. And if we think about medieval literature being read aloud, like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, then we can assume that those who might have heard it passed it on. Then we can see how these theories might have been more widely known even outside the courts. So This brings us to the two categories of physical or biological determiners of gender and gender characteristics, which is placement of the fetus in the womb and conditions that affect fertilization. These medieval theories, again, based on classical thought, described ways that gender was determined. Of course, I'm discussing physical forms of gender here rather than the composition of gender characteristics. We'll get to that later with the humoral theory and physiognomy and astrology. So the medieval variations in anatomical gender are male, female, hermaphrodite, or natural eunuch. Okay, we'll get to that one. I want to note that in the matter of terminology, these would have been categories that medieval society would have recognized, okay? Not what our modern categories are. We would not use the term hermaphrodite, rather we use the term intersex, meaning people who are born with any of several sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, genitals, that do not fit typical binary notions of male or female bodies, okay? Like I said, we'll discuss the natural eunuch and how that differs from a surgical eunuch, for lack of better words, a bit later, okay? For now, let's focus on the medieval belief that physical makeup of an individual contains a multitude of gender characteristic combinations within. I know I brought my water up here. Okay, so biological determiners of gender. Among the classical theories on anatomy and medicine that were studied and practiced in Salerno were the theories of Galen, Macrobius, and Hippocrates, the last of whom believed that there were important developmental stages in the 7th day of conception and by the 7th month in gestation. 7 is an important number. Theories on how physical gender was determined mostly involved the placement of the fetus in the womb. Placement in the womb also determined gender anomalies like hermaphroditism. Yes, hermaphroditism. It was believed that the uterus had 7 cells, 3 on the right side that produced male embryos, 3 on the left side that produced female embryos, and the center cell which produces hermaphrodites. Okay? Development of the physical sexes were believed to form on specific sides because for male embryos, the right side was close to the warm and humid liver. And for female embryos, the left side was close to the cold and dry spleen. Logical. The persistent association of warmth and humidity with males and cold dryness with females translates to other theories on gender and gender characteristics for medieval society. And if we can just take a look here. So here is a medieval manuscript image. Ashmole 399 manuscript is a depiction of a female uterus. This is what they thought, yes. I haven't had a chance to see this manuscript in person. I would like to see this manuscript. In fact, let me do one more new share and we can just see a few images from this manuscript. Maybe not. I have too many shares going on here. I can't figure out which one is which. All right, so they have plenty of other. Let's go back to this. There we go. They have plenty of other images on here. They have male images on here. Plenty of diagrams of internal organs, the spleen, the heart, the liver, all of these diagrams on here. And you can go on to the Bodleian website and see these. And also, this person, since I can't show you, Sarah Griffin, who completed her doctorate in philosophy and art history at Oxford, has put together some interesting pages from the Ashmole 399. And you can see some of them have nervous system going through them. Some of them show the venous system, the veins going through, skeletal system. And then all of them are drawings that on vellum that occurred before the Latin treatises were written on them. So you'll see the Latin treatises that overlap into the depiction of the actual person and the skeletal system. So you can see they were added at two different times. The picture came first and then the script. Sorry that I can't show that to you. You can look that up on your own. But this is from the late 13th century. And actually, yeah, oh, shoot. There we go. That's one of the nervous system here. And you can see here how the script ends up spilling over into just a little side note that I think is really interesting with manuscripts. So, okay, now can I put this back to normal? There we go. All right. Other biological determiners of gender. So we get into some fun stuff now. All right. So I knew what I was getting into when I when I studied this. There are a variety of other factors were also believed to determine the sex of a fetus. These theories, based on Aristotelian theories, suggest strong male sperm creates males and weak sperm creates females. Yeah, right. Other causes to produce a male included the quality and quantity of sperm from the father, age of the father, and sperm from the right testicle. Just the right one. The suggestion that male sperm creates a male child brings up the question of, yes, female sperm. They thought, based off of Hippocrates and Galen, who argued that women also produce sperm, that theory started to gain wide acceptance by the 13th century in medical circles, okay? So the predominant belief was that if more of the female sperm settles on the right side of the womb, the result, quite logically, would be a manly woman, or what they would call a virago, all right? That makes sense, right? Conversely, if the female seed settles on the left side of the womb, but the male seed still outnumbers it, the result is an effeminate man, okay? Only when equal amounts of seed from both partners settle in the middle chamber would the result be a hermaphrodite, right? So that's how they explained it. Thus, we have a tempered essentialist paradigm in which both placement and seed quantity determine the sex and gender of the fetus. This model implies that there are at least 5 naturally occurring gender permutations available. Women, manly women, men, feminine men, and then hermaphrodites. So, and that's the variations that we have that then gender characteristics can come in and temper with a little bit. Though it is also not clear what the gender characteristics of the sexual category of hermaphrodite might entail. There's not a lot written on that exactly. So, though these theories seem to focus only on 5 permutations of physical gender, it also harbors the possibility of a larger spectrum of possibilities. In any case, these classical and medieval beliefs on creation of gender and gender characteristics challenge societal norms of a strict masculine and feminine binary. We know that the school in Salerno were concerned with biological gender as a portion of the treatise's attempt to answer the question of how girls and boys are biologically determined in the womb and how their composition of masculine and feminine traits develop. There are other hints of subtle variability as well. Temperature of a man's genitals were also believed to have an effect on determining gender characteristics, so temperature. For instance, according to Constantine, the more warmth and humidity, moistness a man has in his private region, the more likely that he will be masculine and lecherous. So now we have characteristics being associated with gender, the physical gender. In contrast, a man who is cold and dry in his private region will be effeminate and without desire. So coolness or warmth combined with moistness or dryness is related to desire, sex of the child, and gender characteristics. For the most part, cold, dry conditions produce effeminate qualities, for the most part, you see. This continues the association of moist and humid with masculine characteristics and male physicality, and cold and dry with feminine characteristics and female physicality. it is not lost on myself to note an important part of this dynamic. The students and teachers practicing medicine in Salerno were all male, all right? And this is a side note that one of my one of the scholarly articles that I had read over the years talks about. This dominance is most likely a reason that women were believed to produce sperm, because students of medicine were, of course, more familiar with male biology. So I think that they were unfamiliar with male biology and probably even more unfamiliar with female biology, right? Not so dissimilar from today, right? Moving on. All right, now come to the natural eunuch, a biological category of gender for medieval medicine. The medieval perspective on eunuchs and their gender characteristics are mostly tied to their anatomy and identifiable features. Chaucer's Pardoner here, in the image from the Ellesmere manuscript, is referred to as a gelding or a mare. Gelding being a castrated male horse, a mare being a female horse, which alludes to his effeminate physical nature being associated with that of a eunuch, and his behavior possibly with that of a homosexual. The latter of which is another discussion that is complicated in terms of sexual identity in the medieval period. But gender characteristics associated with eunuchs vary, but mostly result in feminine associations that do not detail any specific anatomical features. There were distinctions between a natural eunuch and a surgical eunuch, primarily being the difference that the natural eunuch is a male who is born without male genitalia, as in the case of the Pardoner, so we are to assume from the reading of the Pardoner. For a surgical eunuch, depending on the age of castration, a eunuch could have developed physical features related to masculinity in contrast to a natural eunuch. So that's how they would differentiate that. Though gender characteristics may not be fully detailed in connection with eunuchs, they are typically seen as effeminate. This effeminacy does not necessarily take a negative connotation, okay? Even if effeminacy was regularly perceived in the later Middle Ages as a sign of unauthorized gender transgression, male erotics being considered, an aspect of gender transgression, and therefore condemned, is not usually seen as a sign of any particular physical condition. Excuse me. But there are other factors to consider, like humors, physiognomy, and astrology that have the ability to impact or be associated with gender characteristics. And Pardoner, he's also described here, I guess I can move this too, see, not even paying attention. He's described as having flaxen hair, very pale, and he's also seen as this kind of lecherous character. So not the best depiction in the Ellesmere manuscript that we get for that, but still, those are some of the things he's described as. Okay, so humoral theory. Humoral theory draws on Greek theories of the four humors and how they interact and affect characteristics in an individual. So we have black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. Lovely. These humors had associations with a person's temperature and a particular bodily organ, time of year you were born, personality disposition, and planetary or star positions, astrology. And you can see here, this is from, I believe this is from the Barber Surgeon's Manual of York. And it depicts just another depiction of the four humors associated with people. We'll see another one in a second. And we have the second one right here. Okay, so and I forget where the image on the right is from, but you can see from that image you have a man on one side, the sanguine and the choleric, okay, associated with male personality traits. And then you have a female on the other side, right, associated with the phlegmatic and the melancholy. So, those traits get gendered, all right? And then, of course, you've got the four humors here. And this is the humoral diagram image that I showed you earlier from the National Library of Medicine's research page in Shakespeare. It gives us more of a detailed combination of influencers of characteristics, including planetary signs in there as well. As far as the actual humors, okay, melancholy associated with black bile, thoughtful but depressive, sentimental, unsatisfied with self, and creative. So those are the personality traits that come along with that. Sanguine is associated with blood, courageous, yet irresponsible, confident, and also arrogant, amorous and generous, but also manic. Phlegmatic, okay, associated with phlegm. Calm but resistant to change, rational yet unemotional, dependable and lazy, and sometimes cowardly. Choleric, associated with yellow bile, easily angered but passionate, bad-tempered but energetic, violent, vengeful, but a leader. As you can see, I know, lovely, right? I know. As you can see, the four humors can potentially produce an enormous set of variations of gender characteristics when you start piecing them all together, okay? It's kind of like reading astrology. You can find just about anything kind of like in there. Yeah, gender characteristics kind of the same way. These variations are different in that they form subtle combinations of gender characteristics rather than anatomical categories of gender. Humoral theory considers not only the biological gender, but also the behaviors that are typically produced by those dispositions. Combinations of masculine and feminine characteristics blend to form different compositions of an individual, and it was believed that together, sperm and the four humors influence gender characteristics. I do have to say that though humoral doctrine was generally accepted, it had no practical value. And some medieval physicians were skeptical of the theories even then. Okay, but it did serve for literary authors like Chaucer to start creating their characters and a basis for more dimension, more complex characters. Some of the humoral doctrines specify that the four humors form the sperm, and that whichever humor is dominant in the male during coitus will determine the makeup of the child. Amongst these combinations are the two extremes. The least suitable temperament is that of the melancholic man, cold and dry, who is often impotent and is also characterized by unbridled longing and a twisted judgment which impels him to seek, under the impetus of violence, violent desire, the qualities that he lacks. So not a great guy, all right? Let me see, I lost my place. And then there is the most suitable, all right? The most suitable is the sanguine, all right? Temperament in which warmth and humidity are dominant, okay? Combination of humors was defined in a hierarchy of importance depending on one's age. The combination of blood and yellow bile was more important to infants, but black bile was most important in adolescence, blood in mature people, phlegm in old age. Though it was thought that the dominance of a particular humor also corresponded with the season, the composition of humors in a person was also considered to dominate certain character traits. Blood makes men benevolent, jolly, simple, moderate, bland, and sleepy or fat. Yellow bile makes him unperturbed, just, lean, a thorough masticator, and of good digestion. Black bile makes a man wrathful, grasping, envious, sad, sleepy, and critical. A lot of things that it makes him. Phlegm makes him vigilant, thoughtful, and prudent. So the humor does not correlate to one fixed character trait, like I was saying before. Instead, there are numerous possibilities that can be combined in a variety of ways that offer a better indication on how medieval society understood compositions of characteristics. It was believed that balanced proportions of these humors and of characteristics keep a person in good health, and uneven proportions are the cause of evil in a person. It seems that there was always a possibility of having uneven proportions of the humors. Otherwise, there would never be a dominant trait, positive or negative. This proportional belief further illustrates the understanding of how characteristics were developed. Although these characteristics were developed in uneven ways, there was always an indication that balance could be attained, even if it really was, for naught. Still, there were infinite degrees of imbalance that would inevitably affect gender characteristics in various ways. And here we can see an image of Chaucer's Miller from the Ellesmere manuscript. And he's one example that we can use to explain how Chaucer used humoral theory, and we'll get to physiognomy next, in his characters. He's shown with his bagpipes here. You can see in the side margin, somebody, a scribe has written bagpipe, and also his name is Robin, so you can kind of see that over here. But he's got his bagpipes. He's playing the bagpipes coming out of London in the pilgrimage processional. He is often associated with a choleric humoral composition, which again, choleric, yellow bile, easily angered but passionate, bad-tempered but energetic, violent, vengeful, but a leader. So the Miller is brawny and big-boned, broad-shouldered. He likes violent sports like wrestling. He can ram a door down with his head. You always need someone like that, don't you? He likes to pick a fight with the other pilgrims, all right? And he is described as stealing the grain of his clients in his mill. So he's skimming off the top from his clients. So he's the perfect example of a choleric man. The Miller even tells a bawdy tale meant to make fun of the knight, who tells a tale of ordered violence and what is supposed to be a love story. Overall, he's just a bad-tempered pilgrim. And this spills over into his physiognomy. So let me transition to how physiognomy works, which is the study of a person's physical features and how that reflects their personality. Things like a person's voice, facial features, how a person walks, etc. Medieval texts on physiognomy were ultimately based on a treatise by Polemon, a 2nd century Greek physiognomist. So in Chaucer here, you can see he describes the Miller in a few different ways that overlap with humoral theory. Physically, the Miller is described as having a wart standing on the top of his nose and a tuft of red hairs. Oh, lovely. Red hairs likened to a sow's ear, okay? His mouth is like a big furnace. He's a loud mouth. He's a buffoon. And his vices deal with various sins and deeds of harlotry. Again, quite an unsavory character and violent character associated by his humors and also his physiognomy. Now, physiognomy has a more complex tradition in the Middle Ages, and there are not many consistent theories on medieval physiognomy, but they do address various facial features or vocal features that are characterized as traits. Though the specific character traits vary, we do know that the associated person's physiognomy with character traits that helped reflect that gender and explain that gender. So the medieval beliefs of physiognomy sought to understand the conditions, manners, and virtues of people through the physical makings of the body and the appearance of the face and the sound of the voice. This would also include complexion. Okay? And we have some descriptions in manuscripts of how a person's complexion might reveal characteristics. In one manuscript, we have descriptions and analysis of a man's complexion who is described as ruddy of color, so red, and is known to desire the company of women, so that comes along with it. The Miller also has a reddish hue and red hair, and so he's also associated with that. The choleric man, he should have a yellowish color, somewhat tinged with red, in terms of complexion, and he's described as desiring the company of women more than he needs to if he has this coloring. In contrast, the phlegmatic man is white and pale and has little desire in the company of women. And the melancholy man should be somewhat black and pale, which all leads to some vagueness when dealing with these theories and categories, but they did have some associations going This is where it begins to be complex in determining specific gender markers. But these were often composed with other gender descriptions and categories to highlight how these characteristics work in combination, which is something that Chaucer understood. So now leading to astrology. The variations of gender characteristics in a person are also evident in medieval theories of astrological alignments and their connection to gender characteristics. Through astrology, though astrology was thought to have some impact on gender characteristics, astrological treatises treat the subject in a generalized and not very comprehensive way. What we do know is that gender was assigned to certain celestial bodies, which were believed to impact gender and characteristics in some way. Still, there is no comprehensive study of the matter in modern scholarship that indicates an exact matchup of the influence of a particular celestial dominance on gender characteristics at the time of a person's birth. Still, the varying influences of the planets and the zodiac further indicate that there are many influences that were believed to impact gender characteristics. So in the manuscript image here on the right, we see the zodiac signs from an 11th century manuscript, another medical miscellany, which shows an early medieval chart of the zodiac based on classical models. You have the astrological signs going counterclockwise around the central figure as the sun, very Christ-like for an interesting blend of Christianity and maybe mysticism. The four seasons are in each corner. You can't see the bottom there, sorry about that. But each corner has one of the seasons. Overall, it is one example of many manuscript illuminations or drawings that show the importance that astrology played, at least theoretically. And we have a lot of these different manuscript images. Along with, in addition, the next image, the influence of the sign of the zodiac man, okay? And how that is represented in the body. The zodiac man here on the left side is a visual representation of a male figure showing which parts of the body are influenced by which zodiac sign. The head is associated with Aries, neck with Taurus, shoulders and chest with Gemini, lungs with Cancer, and so on, okay? Here you can see a zodiac man from the Harley manuscript 3719 in the British Library, and how the explanations are tied to parts of the body, sometimes describing the dominant influence over that particular part of the body. So, we have that kind of connotation going along as well as gendering of some of the celestial bodies and zodiac signs. So Bartholomeus Anglicus, in his 13th century encyclopedia on the properties of things, notes the male genders of 6 zodiac signs. So male genders: Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. So all male. Bartholomeus expressly identifies only one sign as female, Cancer, but leaves the gender of the remaining signs, Taurus, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, Pisces, unidentified. It's very interesting that he leaves them unidentified, only chooses one, Cancer, but identifies 6 of them clearly as male. It is difficult to determine whether this celestial influence on gender characteristics was understood as exact science or as superstition, maybe folklore. For the most part, it was discussed as a vague theory that was understood to play a part in the formation of a person's destiny and possibly in their gender characteristics. But some of the planets influence gender characteristics we see in Chaucer's Wife of Bath. So for those of us that know, this is also from the Ellesmere manuscript, Chaucer's Wife of Bath. You can just see it, how it gets inlaid in there with the text. But it's also in a more detailed inlay there for us. Chaucer's Wife of Bath demonstrates the connection between planets, signs, and gender characteristics. To account for her personality, the wife describes her horoscope, which involves the influences of the planets, Venus and Mars, and the zodiac sign of Taurus the bull. So for certain, I am all Venus in feeling, she says, but she says, my heart is Mars or Martian. Venus gave me my lust and licorousness. Mars gave me my sturdy hardiness. I'll talk about that in a second. My ascendant sign was Taurus and Mars within. So we get the negative connotation here with Venus and the wife of Bath's feminine characteristics. Okay? Allison, which is her name, believes that the passion of Venus and Mars influences her behavior, though in different ways. This self-analysis, however, is incomplete in that the wife neglects the influence of Mercury as an important element, because later in the prologue, she describes the workings of Venus and Mercury in the sign of Pisces. Mercury is desolate in Pisces, where Venus is exalted, and Venus falls where Mercury is raised. These lines emphasize the extreme separation of Venus's sensuality and the mercurial intellectual personality. When Venus is most powerful, Mercury is powerless, signifying a connection between planets and the amount of influence they have in relation to each other. It is clear that the passion Allison feels is influenced by both Mars and Venus. The reference to Mercury suggests that the wife of Bath's astrological analysis of herself is incomplete because she also has a mercurial side. It is revealed by her rhetorical skills, her ability to speak and interpret clerical writings and engage her husband and the clerical community at large. This becomes especially evident in her interpretation of the misogynistic clerical views of women. While Allison is railing against the clerical views of women, she is influenced by the passions of Venus and Mars and the intellectualism of Mercury. So you can see that now coming to a combination, even though they're still associating negative connotations with female characteristics. The composition of her personality thus is more complex, more subtle than even she allows. Medieval astrologists consider these influences as only part of the picture and also understood that though individuals had inborn inclinations, owing to a zodiac sign or planetary influence, they also had individual choice to overcome these characteristics. So it wasn't, a final determiner. Allison acknowledges that she followed her own path through life under her astrological influences. She says, I followed my inclination by virtue of my constellation. And she goes on to state how she's more influenced by both Venus and Mars. Allison's horoscope reveals character traits aligned with Venus, in which Allison reveals her lust or receives her lust and licorousness from, okay? And from Mars, she receives her sturdy hardiness. Mars was associated with aggressive behavior, and Venus, of course, was associated with love. The influence of the constellation Taurus, combined with that of the planets Mars and Venus, suggests that women will be unchaste. That's what they suggested with a Taurus rising sign, right? So you can see how these characteristics become associated with gender, and finally, gender characteristics. Ultimately, these characteristics are a tempering of masculine and feminine traits in some part. But these are not bound by strict gender binaries. Chaucer demonstrates Allison's characteristics as a blend of masculine and feminine that are removed from positive and negative constructions. Neither her masculine or feminine characteristics are meant to be viewed negatively or positively, though clerical authorities and others might disagree. Instead, her characteristics are meant to demonstrate how a person can register gender on a spectrum in a variety of different ways. There is not a specific positive or negative interpretation. Rather, that interpretation is posited on individual and social responses that are just as varied as the spectrum of gender characteristics. So what do we do with all of this now? Welcome to my world. Just as there is a variety of theories detailing the causes and features of gender, as demonstrated here with biology, humoral theory, physiognomies, and astrology, so too Chaucer could have understood how these variables might have led to certain characteristic distinctions. These theories lead to an understanding of how the variables of gender characteristics worked according to medieval society's beliefs. I believe literary examples may illustrate how a medieval audience understood gender characteristics in terms of that spectrum. So, thank you. And here's Chaucer signing us off from the Ellesmere manuscript. And I think now we can open it up to questions.
What is licorousness?
Licorousness, lechery, kind of, oh, I'm blanking on it right now, licorousness. Sexual appetite, you know, proclivity, yeah, very sexually forward, I guess you could say, you know. And if you've read The Wife of Bath, you know, you can tell she's very, very forward. Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about, I do some research on tarot cards, and so there's obviously some connections here. And with the tarot card, it seems like there are more of these conversation pieces where people can make stories. I mean, you know, you can use it for divination too, like astrology, but you can also kind of make characters, make stories in that way. Do you find any, have you looked at any of the tarot cards and so forth for some of those same kind of discussions, like the Visconti Sforza deck mainly?
I have not, no.
No.
I've read a little bit about with the astrology, you know, they do talk a little bit about tarot reads and stuff like that. And they do, one of the articles that I read years ago talked about it being a social kind of thing, yeah. And that's kind of what I see too about, you know, kind of going with astrology, you know. I mean, part of it maybe had a practical use, but most of it was probably believed in terms of like, you know, having a connection, having fun, social kind of interaction, and playing with, you know, literary characters, you know, yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more with tarot reads. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Since they were wrong about their theories back then, what do you think the odds are that we might be off on ours?
Well, males looking at female bodies, probably very wrong, right? You know, very not accurate. You know, but of course we do have, you know, medical science that has progressed. So, you know, we can look at, you know, doctors can look inside. We've had all those kind of, you know, tests and stuff that they have not done, you know, in the medieval era. So trying to look at internal organs and guess.
When they still want to examine the urine, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Given that you give urine samples now when you go to the doctor.
Yeah, right. I mean, that they, you know, even in Greek medicine, you know, all the way back, that they still thought, you know, urine tells you something about what's going on with your body. Yeah.
And they taste it too, the urine sample.
Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe in the Renaissance, not in the medieval era.
Bloodletting was often used to put humors back in balance in terms of wellness. And I was wondering if that was also used in terms of characteristics or gender. Do they do this? Do you know anything about that? Do they use the same techniques there?
There is some bloodletting to balance those humors and temper some of those characteristics, you know. So if you had the undesirable, you know, melancholy man, you know, there was areas that you could bloodlet, and you know, I'm forgetting exactly, you know, but there's depictions in the Barber Surgeon's Manual of York, which is 12th century. Don't quote me on that. But yes, you know, there are connections where they show where you can bloodlet for certain reasons on a type of zodiac man, basically, you know, that kind of depiction. So there were some associations that you could do bloodletting that, you know, could possibly change, you know, character traits by altering, you know, bodily humors as well. Yeah.
I'm going to apologize in advance because like, this is a sort of remembered thing from something I came across scholarship wise like 20 years ago. I think it dates much of the literature in terms of primary sources dates like the early modern period, but I'm curious if you're seeing it in the sources that you're using in the medieval period. The idea that if you change the environment around the body, that the body can then change.
Hmm.
Like if a woman gets too hot,
Mhm.
like the genitalia may spontaneously come out.
Hmm. No, I have not come across that.
Okay.
No, that's just just saying, I mean,
You haven't come across it.
there's many manuscripts out there. Now I'm going to be looking for that. I wonder because, they were very similar, I mean, the humoral theory translates almost, basically the same way into Renaissance.
Yeah, but it's like if you took a female body that's supposed to be like cold and dry, and that female body gets like hot and wet enough that like,
Would that change?
because they thought that like the internal anatomy of a woman was like the inversion of the male.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a licorice.
Yeah, and so, okay, so that can be, but also like, so spontaneously producing male genitalia, like
Mm.
transitioning from like one.
Mm. To, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind
But
of like Virginia
that-
Woolf's Orlando. Yeah. I don't know. That would be interesting to think, like, if you could change the outside, temperature, dryness, moistness, and would that alter? I think that they would think maybe that it was an internal kind of, but I mean, that's just my thought of it. That would be very interesting, and with all of the theories, I mean, it's gotta come from somewhere, so I mean, there's probably a kernel of it somewhere in some manuscript.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to.
Hunt for it.
That's coming to mind is Lorraine Daston.
Aston?
Daston, but it's like the late early modern period sort of thing. It's
Okay.
Enlightenment. And I was just wondering if
Huh.
that track, but
Yeah.
hey, maybe your next project.
Hey, that sounds interesting. Well, I mean, when you say genitalia, that might spontaneously combust. I think you had me. No, that's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Just wonder about the Albert Durr melancholy when it increasingly becomes like the artist's temperament because of the creativity and so forth. So then they have that. Yeah, and the Born Under Saturn and all of that. And so, but that was considered feminine, but then you have these artists, Leonardo and Michelangelo and so forth,
Mhm.
who,
Or Ficino.
yeah, exactly.
The melancholy is like the creative scholarly.
The creative,
work.
yeah, and the tormented kind of, artist type. But so that was considered feminine, but the arts in general weren't. I mean, but is there any more on that you have thoughts about in terms of just the arts or creativity as being like a feminine or masculine kind of trait?
I think there are some associations with artistry, being feminized, but I don't think it's a total feminization. And I think it becomes one of those things that become, tempered or balanced, like, you need to have a little bit of masculine and feminine. So I think, the artist would kind of balance that a little bit, and then probably, have a little bit of the tortured aspect as well that might come along with it. But I think also that becomes an association with that, type of person, an artist. Maybe even more so than it is just like a melancholy disposition, someone who is like creating and constantly thinking and doing those kinds of things. Yeah, that might be more of a mentality. But yeah, that's our more modern thinking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so they're kind of equated with like professions and so forth.
Sometimes, you certainly have someone like the Miller, someone who is a male, masculine, hypermasculine, which is part of the rest of my dissertation, goes into a hypermasculine mode, okay? And that's when you start seeing, that's what's problematic in society, the problem with, this type of hypermasculine figure, that, is violent, fights with other pilgrims, depictions of rape in medieval literature, that also becomes part of that too. So I think there is a mix in everything, but I do think that, you have, you certainly have some associations, and I don't think it would be feminized in a negative way, like the arts, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you certainly would see that as a positive benefit. That's just my thought, you know, from, yeah, right.
I find fascinating because I don't know your description of non-binary configurations or characteristics.
Mhm.
But fearing that I'm hightailing it out of the Middle Ages too quickly. How does this system of understanding grow into binary system?
From non-binary, I think this is socially, culturally, I think that that's what kind of gets us the binary, you know. Whereas I think, you know, some people understand that the characteristics come in to play. They're still pinned in by, you know, you're a feminized man, you're a masculine woman, they transgress that kind of thing. You know, even though we still, you know, we see, you know, these happen all the time, you know, right? We've got that balance of gender characteristics. And then, so I think the binary always exists, you know, but whether that exists in like a social kind of construction or not is the question. I don't know. That's my thoughts. I don't know if I fielded that very well. You went highfalutin on me, bro. I'm talking about urine specimens here. No, but I think the binaries, yeah, I think that. Mhm.
Social government.
Mhm.
It's interesting. Well, my question is, what happens to allow that to happen? And maybe you answered when we were talking about the hypermasculine. It becomes a pole that absorbs configurations.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think too, you have those markers of transgression in society that then becomes you know, associated with gender. And it's like, oh, okay, now you've transgressed that in whatever way, you know, and we certainly see that with, you know, the homosexual identity, you know, in medieval Renaissance culture, you know, that's pre-identity, you know, pre-social construction, but still, you know, you see that kind of, you know, problematic, you know, thoughts in terms of, you know, those people. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's hard to define, you know, exactly. So that's the best I can do with that one. Other questions?
It just seems like sometimes parents accept more kind of vagaries and nuance and fluidity, and other eras want more codification of things. So probably more the Renaissance, I guess. You have the desire to codify and have, like, you know, symmetry and left, right, and balance and all of that.
It's also true that that's when they actually did finally start doing that section.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, accuracy became a little bit better, you know, and then.
Yeah, but perhaps more fixed.
Yeah, right.
I think we're just at about time to give us enough time to get the chairs put away before they close the library on us.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
That
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone at home. All right, am I logging off of Zoom?
There's something that I'm